They're basically presenting authenticity as just another commodity in an aesthetic. Now, art used to be less of a mirror and more of a door that we opened, you know? You can't imagine using social media or experimenting with that in a way that doesn't literally reflect who you are.
Right.
The future is canceled. For some of us, it's been a little bit of a harrowing, dark, dare I say, time. The US election on its own has been interesting, to say the least. And while I'm just as shaken up as anyone else, I keep thinking back to a surprising dark horse that might have been found in the most unsuspecting of places. And that would be in this absolutely fantastic Joshua Citarella interview featuring Matty Healy on pop culture via the Doomscroll podcast. Matty Healy, of course, might be better known as the frontrunner of the band The 1975. And boy, oh boy, do I love the 1975, but that is not the point of this video. I highly recommend listening to the essay in full, as it's quite literally what I feel both parties have stated they would prefer, and it's kind of ironic that I'm chopping this up into a more consumable piece of content when the whole issue is that we can't sit still for a lengthy, holistic piece of content. But if you don't have 2 free hours of your time, or your maladaptive attention span simply won't allow it, I'm hoping this little recap will serve as a good teaser. And for me, just being exposed to this discussion opened a lot of different avenues of thought that I hadn't really been exploring. The main thing that I'm taking away from the interview is questioning, what does growth look like in a society that's already started to eat and gorge, and I would say choke even on its own tail? If you're new here, hi, I'm Kate, and I love art, and so can you. And right off the bat, I feel like one of the most important premises of this interview is the idea that self-actualization is not accessible to everyone, and therefore our desires will never fully align.
We're in a different society now where it's all about self-actualization. It's all about becoming the most best authentic version of yourself.
Right.
Without any institutions to kind of guide you of how to do that, it's difficult, right? A lot of young men will find a Jordan Peterson video, not to talk shit on any particular academic. I'm not a very partisan person, but you will get people who will be like, understand that idea of being like, oh, you're a man who wants to be a man.
Right.
Here's literally 12 rules of how to do, you know what I mean?
Whether that's culturally, politically, and before anything else, let's define this term, right? So self-actualization comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a pyramid that aims to outline the different levels of basic human needs. The reason why it's structured into a pyramid is that it intends to showcase that you need to fulfill one level of the hierarchy of needs before you are ready to desire the next level. Self-actualization in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the highest personal aspirational human need in the hierarchy. It represents where one's potential is fully realized after more basic needs such as the body and the ego have been fulfilled. I feel like this pyramid has a lot to do with the disconnect surrounding the election, and I feel like a lot can be summed up by these comments that were left on the little explainer video by School of Life on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I thought it was beautifully summated in this comment. It's hard to care about virtue and humility when a person is hungry in every aspect of life. When basic needs aren't met, what is perceived as issues of virtue simply do not matter to those who are reckoning with a level of physical security. What's ironic is that on both sides of the aisle, at least in the context of the United States two-party system, issues of security have genuine examples of being threatened. It just depends in what way. That could be job security, that could be the ability to secure long-term housing, or even groceries. It could be fundamental rights surrounding your body and your autonomy, issues of war, resource scarcity due to environmental issues, or even overbearing bureaucracy. Okay, and so what does this have to do with what Matty Healy and Mr. Joshua are talking about? I think as we become more individualistic and exist in an increasingly fractured media environment, security issues start to cosplay as virtue issues depending on your perspective. This is not by any means to say that any two issues are equitable or the level of pain and hurt is equitable, but I think it's safe to say that those who are not already on the path of American prosperity are struggling in some sense of the word. There's a deep mistrust in institutions, which this interview talks a lot about. And when times are tough, it's hard to hold grace for people who are not a part of your tribe. The Doomscroll interview does a fantastic job of identifying this lack of collective trust. And we can see that in examples of taking something really esoteric, like how to be a man, something that means so many things to so many different people, and boiling it down into a simple checklist. I can see why something like that is genuinely attractive to someone looking for some sense of security to hold on to in such a volatile environment. Okay, I had to add a little light. We're getting dark over here. The winter is coming. Tying it back to art, which is what I mostly talk about and what I'm mostly interested in. Without institutional support and a society that's not solely focused on capitalizing on everything, it's very difficult to have something culturally that doesn't resemble something of the past.
Hauntology, slow cancellation of the future. These are ideas that are coming from a pop culture theorist, let's say pop culture political theorist named Mark Fisher, whose famous book, Capitalist Realism, written in the fallout from 2008, kind of explores this problem of the 21st century of not having a political alternative. Socialism was defeated. It's capitalism from here on and forever. What Fisher is writing about is the developmental arc of neoliberalism. When we talk about lost futures, there's a perpetual nostalgia for the 80s. Now, what happened in the 1980s? It was Reagan in my country and Thatcher where you grew up, and the Volcker shock with profound interest rates and shoring up of the money supply, and the advent of neoliberalism in which everybody got a lot more poor and started to work harder for less. And so the kind of utopian imaginaries, the optimistic visions of the future that had emerged in the 60s, 70s leading up until that point began to recede from popular culture. You know, the future has extreme wealth disparity and people are living in poverty and we're uploading our brains to the internet and then the robots are going to kill us. That's the future imaginary that we have now. This slow cancellation of the future, something that you and I talk about a lot, corresponds to in aesthetic stagnation on top of the political and economic stagnation, in that the amount of creative risk that people could take in previous generations was proportionately more. And that was mostly because the wage floor was high, the cost of living was low, and so the total amount of decommodified time, like you could spend 25, 30% of your time just making punk music or doing your weird art practice. And as society has become more and more privatized over the course of neoliberalism, the total amount of free time that people have to pursue creative practices is basically that has disappeared from contemporary life.
Yeah, and what it's created is this hyper-commodified sphere of art where the only art that is worth making or is possible to make is art that is successful financially or does numbers. Once it was so obvious that consumer capitalism and the marching horizonless kind of motion of neoliberalism had won, young people had to change this idea from selling out to getting the bag.
Yes.
So now you get the bag.
Yeah. That was the millennial experience. It's like, I'm a bootstrapping entrepreneur.
This is it, right? This is a Fisher thing, but has decayed any socially democratic aspect of society that previously allowed the working class to be a dominant part of the cultural production of our society. We've gotten to a place now where we can't quite imagine something truly revolutionary and new. And spending the time and building the audience for that new revolutionary thing is too expensive.
It's exactly. My favorite example of this is, and it's a fantastic film, The Irishman, where when the film was sold, it has, stars Robert De Niro, and he ages, I don't know, like 40 years in the course of the narrative. It was easier to sell the film and to later invent the technology to de-age him rather than to invest in another young actor who could play the younger version of him. And I think this is very pronounced in film. The kind of classic, the easy example of it is just this infinite reboots of films that have already been made. And that's not like necessarily, we were overdue for another one of these. Like we do these every 10 years. It's because from a financial viewpoint, it's a really risky investment to put money into any sort of new IP.
As discussed in the interview, they're often bringing up this book by a person named Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher wrote a book called Capitalist Realism, which according to Wikipedia is loosely defined the conception that capitalism is the only viable economic system and thus there can be no imaginable alternative. So it's easier to imagine things breaking, the end of the world, whatever that means, than it is to imagine a world in which there's a fundamentally different structure to how we orient society. And under this world, art and the entity or group that created it cannot be detached. Media has become much more of an extension of the self. We are worried when we don't get enough likes on whatever we post on Instagram or don't get enough comments, because that now means that we aren't good and that we haven't earned a level of validation from our peers. It also means that media and how we portray ourselves in it becomes more individualized.
I don't know what a scene of kids look like, which is why I think like Dazed or Vogue are constantly trying to make everything
scrambling for microtrends,
or core business core or long hair core. Art is great when you've eaten and you're not having an argument with a loved one.
No, that's true.
You're not interested in art if you're hungry or if you're having serious issues. So let's call art entertainment. Yes, if we allow the decimation of art, or if we allow art to become completely for you pageified, the same thing will happen to all human experience, which is one of the dangerous things about the phone. What Silicon Valley understands about the phone is that a lot of people will say this thing, which is true. The problem that we have is that the way the apps are laid out and prioritized is flat. So you will get a notification about somebody that you've never met in your life liking a photo that you made 3 weeks ago with the same tenacity or priority as a text message from your mum. So we just bounce between genuinely authentic human experience, talking to people, to just going on Reddit for 10 minutes and then flitting back between it. And I think that the flattening out of all experience and the incentivization of short-term pleasure over long-term satisfaction is a problem. You know, like long-term satisfaction was what I was trying to go to with the show.
We often talk about fashion and fast fashion and how fast fashion has caused all these different micro trends, and the seasons at which things are being produced and consumed just become shorter and shorter and shorter. But if you look around in every sense of media, that has happened, right? No one listens to just one genre of music or anymore. I would argue that no one really has the same Spotify experience anymore. It feels invasive if someone were to look at, say, your Instagram Explore page without you being there. Why? Because your media consumption and how you participate in it is now a direct reflection of who you are within the parameters of our particular society. And so when we go see the 1975 do these wild things like eat meat, raw meat on stage, or do other things on stage, which, by the way, I did see. I was at Madison Square Garden. It was a great show. Instead of abstracting the media and trying to figure out what it means to us, maybe some of us are more likely to look at it and attach it to Matty Healy's character or whoever else and attack the individual. There's no separation. And that's not to say that there isn't a level of personal responsibility, especially once you get to a certain level of audience, right? I thought it was really interesting that Joshua brought up this concept called Poe's Law.
Context collapse is a term that was coined by Dana Boyd, who was the founder of Data and Society, which is a think tank that specializes in social media. It is also sometimes analogized to Poe's Law, which was a rule that emerged on 4chan. But basically anything that is said in jest or in irony on the internet, given to a scale of like millions and millions of people, someone in there is going to take it 100% seriously. Yeah. This is kind of the media theory behind why we need to have certain levels of individual responsibility in what we post. The flip side of that, my concern, is that when we enforce those things too heavily, and we're saying that people are not able to deal or interpret or should not be exposed to complicated art, we're saying that most people are too stupid to get involved with art, right? And that's actually a profoundly anti-democratic thing, that they're too dumb to make up their own minds. If you extrapolate that out a bit further, it's like, well, they can't have aesthetic preferences, they can't choose what art and culture they like to participate in. Should they be able to vote? You know, there's like really weird downstream implications when you start to say that most people are too stupid to make up their own minds.
Where in an attempt to protect people and protect their intentions when consuming a piece of media, you err on the side of caution. But as he said, the flip side of that is that maybe we don't, as he said, think that people can consume and hold complicated thoughts, which I agree is patronizing. But I also think that if we don't represent that in the media, we start narrowing our scope of what's acceptable to express. Everything you do, it's been done before. Maybe we linger for nostalgia because supposedly back in that day, there was hope. When basic needs aren't met, not only do we become a lot more tribal and a lot less caring of the world around us because we're literally struggling to eat or live safely or find housing or whatever else, but you're also not in a place where you can build art or contribute to culture, especially now when, as I love to talk about, art and the funding behind it has been absolutely decimated. I talk about this a lot within the context of music, but I do believe, as I've written in this piece about AI, that a lot of that value has been extracted by big tech, private equity. And while these players have done some beneficial things like expanding access to these technologies, both on the consumption and creation side, there has not been a level of capital put back into the creators who build that culture in the first place.
A lot of people are not in the economic position to do that.
Right.
You know, but a lot of people are.
And they choose not to.
And they choose not to for really...
I think we need to build new institutions.
Exactly.
I'm not saying the existing ones are savable. I think that the task of our generation, people like you and me, is to build new institutions, new trustworthy institutions. Because the platforms are turning everything into the fucking museum of ice cream, where everything is content for ad views and so on.
Same with the Museum of Ice Cream. They are no longer art institutions. They are essentially adverts for the concept of an art institution or the art institution itself, which is why you'll go to a gallery and you'll walk in and you'll go, the Cause times Rick and Morty experience, or a concept like Marvel. Citarella will talk about this, the most enduring product that has been created by those companies is the consumer identity of the people who are into it.
Right.
So what Marvel or other artists have realized over the past 15 years with social media and people's kind of projection of who they are, and is that being a fan of something is now a form of political identity. Your relationship with fandom now is going like this to the poster, like showing other people who you are through your kind of fandom. And you therefore become essentially a part of the promotional labor force of the company itself. Your favorite album will probably be an album that you hate the first time you hear it. Now, getting a young artist who's signed to a major label to make a record like that, this long-term investment, do you know what I mean? Like it's not a profitable, feasible way of doing anything anymore. The reason that we take meme culture, the reason that we take it very, very seriously is because behind this new model of communication and discourse predominantly going on amongst you people is a real set of social circumstances and economic circumstances and environments that they're kind of reacting to and talking about. And I think that in the way that I've always been a massive champion of comedy, not just comedians, but the idea of using humor to delineate important ideas, because the idea of comedy is to take the biggest ideas possible and convey them in the fewest words.
If you are an artist, if you are going to somehow be extremely lucky and beat the statistical odds and be a full-time artist, it changes what you can afford to make. We can't risk to create new movie concepts. We are not investing in new IP. I thought one of my favorite sections was when Matty and Josh are discussing the Museum of Ice Cream and experiences like the Van Gogh experience, which I have been to.
I want to talk to you about the Museum of Ice Creamification. How they have become adult daycare centers. And the loss of gatekeeping in art institutions being a bad thing in general, how alternative institutions need to be subsidized to recreate a culture that is defined by creation rather than consumption.
One of the things that was offered to young creatives was a platform in which anyone can post. There's no editors, there's no curators, there's no gatekeepers. You can bypass any opinion and just post what you want to the platforms. Those people, this is very curious and pronounced in the art world, they never donated to museums. Unlike the Carnegies, unlike the Fricks, unlike all of the robber barons of the 20th century that, pillaged society but then gave back in the form of these extraordinary libraries and museums and public institutions like the opera, for example. The new 21st century Silicon Valley robber barons have not chosen to give back to culture. And that's actually very unique thing in the development of capitalism, because usually when people take a lot off of the table, they give something back in some way.
But it was really interesting hearing this perspective of, okay, we know these experiences that are dressed up as you're going to see art. The intention when you go to those places is for you to create content, which then becomes an advertisement for the experience of creating that content. We're always performing, right? All while we are the product. And this whole experience is dizzying. It's confusing, it's overstimulating, and it's wasting our time. The past couple days, I've been a bit sad. I think I tend to get a bit more tired and maybe a bit more sad when it starts to be the colder months, and then also the political climate, a lot of different things. But I noticed that my natural inclination is to turn to consuming more content. I am someone who tries and prides myself on being very conscious about limiting that consumption. But when you're inundated by notifications every day, you're inundated by these news stories of outrageous, horrible things happening all around the world at every second, It feels like all you can hope for is to watch something silly at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like we keep poking ourselves with fire, and as a result, our skin is becoming tougher, it's becoming more numb, and we're becoming less recognizable to those who don't resemble who we already are. I don't really know what the solution is. I don't think anyone does right now, but I do recommend checking this out if you're interested in this sort of thing. Very, very interesting, thought-provoking video, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Something's got to change because it has to. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.